Have you ever wondered if it's possible to live in sync with your cycle? Do you struggle with a negative mindset around your period? Are you wondering if it's possible to be feminist and anti-birth control? We're going to explore these questions and so much more in the Managing Your Fertility podcast, because this is about helping you live a whole and full life. I'm your host and guide, Bridget, joining you in this journey of exploration related to women's healthcare, feminism, and fertility awareness. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, Cami. Welcome to the show. We're excited to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
So let's do some introductions here before we jump into our topic today and just going into a deeper dive of fertility awareness. Cami Berthiaume is a digital content coordinator for the Archdiocese of St. Paul's Office of Communications. It encompasses her role as producer for Practicing Catholic, a radio show collaboration between the Archdiocese and Relevant Radio 1330 AM. Her love for authentic evangelization also led to the creation of her side business, Cookies by CJ, a custom cookie business catering to celebrations of the sacraments and all events in between, which is so cool. Cami married her high school sweetheart, Ryan, in the summer of 2019, and her love for women's health really stems from her deep dive into the world of NFP during their engagement. And when she's not baking cookies, you can find her visiting new breweries in the Twin Cities, hosting game nights in her tiny apartment, which I love, and volunteering with the youth ministry and confirmation programs at her parish, although she says not simultaneously. So really excited to have you and excited to get into this. So let's jump in with, I'm giving this overview introduction, but really tell us more about yourself and your role in communications and evangelization with the Archdiocese, but also just personally, a little bit more about your journey and learning about NFP and what that looks like.
Yeah, totally. So right out of college, I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science in Sociology from the University of Minnesota. And I wasn't super clear like where my life is going to lead after that. So I, was doing the typical post-graduation, browsing all the recruiter websites, and I saw a position for an evangelization intern at the Archdiocese. And I was just kind of intrigued by that because at that point I knew that I wanted to work for the church. I was being called to work for the church, serve for mission, but I didn't really know, exactly what that looked like. So I applied for this intern position and I was accepted. So I started out right after I actually married Ryan in 2019. We'd just gotten back from our honeymoon, I remember, and it was like a couple weeks after that where I started. So that was kind of a fun little transition. But yeah, my first few months there was a lot of just of learning, typical administration work and understanding how the Archdiocese worked at the chancery level. Like you kind of mentioned earlier, I have helped with programs at my parish. So I've kind of understood what it looks like at the parish level, but I was really intrigued like what it looked like at the archdiocesan level, because you always hear, oh, the Archdiocese does this and that, and the Archdiocese is helping with this and that. But it was kind of intriguing to me to understand the faces behind what the Archdiocese actually looked like. So yeah, during my first few months there as the intern, I learned a lot about evangelization, more like how to meet people where they are, how to draw them deeper and form disciples, which is what we're all called to do through missionary discipleship. And, it's also kind of cool to have been able to work in the same building as the Archbishop and Bishop, right?
So awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. So then I ended up being hired full-time in February of 2020 and actually worked off for about a month before COVID came and kind of turned everything upside down. So ever since then, I've been working from home. Which I actually love because I'm kind of a homebody. I like working at home and I feel very productive here. And it's been interesting to navigate my first full year of full-time work at home. But I actually transferred into the communications office in August of 2020. And it's honestly just been such a great fit personally with the people that I work with and just learning all about how to promote the workings of the church and to uplift the parishes that we serve and just kind of learn how we serve better. That's what it comes down to.
That's so great.
Yeah.
What it comes to I'm cutting you off there a little bit.
No,
I
you're
just love
totally
what you
good.
said about how, you're really seeing the inside workings, because I think that's a huge part of, especially in this space, fertility awareness, when you're in a different role like I am, or, working with other organizations, or in a more influencer role of fertility awareness, you forget all the inner workings and everything that goes on
Yeah.
within the Archdiocese, and just how much they're doing and how many programs they're working on. So I think that's something that is helpful, for me to remember. And I think for those who might be frustrated, like, oh, I want the Archdiocese to do more, I want parishes to do more.
Right.
Like, well, what can we do as lay people to support? Because there's so much, and there's only a few people, right? I mean, there's
Oh
only
yeah,
so many hours in the week. So
definitely. Yeah.
I know we'll get into that a little bit later as far as, just as lay people in their roles. But I think it's just really helpful for you to offer that perspective and that reminder for listeners too, and myself, like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. It's not just, 4 programs and that's it. It's hundreds. I
Right.
mean, there's so much happening.
Right. So many offices within the Archdiocese that all, work together and rely on one another to make things run smoothly. Um, yeah, because I admit, I was that person that was like, the Archdiocese is doing this and this and this, but like, how can things move more smoothly? And so it's just been interesting to understand the people and the workings behind that and what it really takes to help and to serve parishes.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so and then I cut you off, but to jump into
You're
your
good.
your personal perspective of your passion for fertility awareness and NFP, and just a little bit more of your own journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I first kind of learned about NFP when my good friend Kathleen was getting married in, I think, 2018. And I just remember sitting at a party with her, pre-COVID, when you could go to parties. But I remember asking her as she was talking about marriage prep, like, what even is NFP? Like, 'cause she was telling us like she had to go to take these classes, and um, I guess I just didn't really understand. I mean, I knew the church's teachings on like contraception and all that, and abstaining from sex until marriage, but I hadn't even heard of NFP. I honestly, I remember thinking, at this time, at the age of, I think I was like 20 or 21, that the church taught, that unless you wanted to have a baby, you didn't really have sex in marriage because you could get pregnant every time. Like, that is honestly what I thought. And that is so, like, it's embarrassing to admit that, but it just shows you how much improvement we can make, just in raising awareness of what NFP and fertility awareness is. And this was even after going to Catholic school for my whole life. So that was a shock to me that you didn't abstain, unless you wanted to have a kid. So after kind of hearing her testimony and what she was going through, I was super intrigued by it. I wanted to learn about my body, and after deep diving into it, I didn't really understand why this wasn't taught more to women and even men in Catholic schools, high school level, and women in general who didn't really know what was happening with their cycles. I also kind of realized over time that it's a good stepping stone for helping women get off of like hormonal birth control, because it shows you, that there's a scientific, realistic, proven way to avoid and achieve pregnancy without birth control. And to me, that is authentic women empowerment. Yeah. And just, I guess, lastly, I just love the church's teachings on giving yourself wholly to your spouse. So when we say our wedding vows, we're promising to give each other to one another wholly and not holding anything back. So why would you do that with your fertility? That was a really big, I guess, revelation when it comes to NFP for me, and something that I hold near and dear.
That's beautiful. I've got to go back to the part where you had said, I appreciate your vulnerability and I'm so grateful for it, because I think there are definitely other people listening who have had, similar, if not the same thoughts and other ideas around what NFP is or isn't, and just a lack of understanding around sex and babies in the Catholic
Mm-hmm.
Church. So did you go to Catholic school like K through 12, or was it something that you transitioned to where you were in high school at a Catholic?
Yeah, I went there second grade through 12. Yep.
Okay.
And I just remember in health class, they didn't really, they taught the classic Catholic school method of just abstinence with no like background really as to why you do that, aside from just like, this is what the Catholic Church says, which really honestly is a disservice, I think, to the church's beautiful teaching on that. And not to blame my school or anything, because I'm sure that's how it is, I'm sure, in most schools, because there's that fine line of when is it appropriate to start talking to kids about NFP. and fertility awareness, and expanding on it in a way that is helpful and fruitful.
Yeah, and I know there's that aspect too where it's like, okay, when is it the school, when is it the parents, or
Right.
are we teaching and encouraging the parents to make sure they feel that they have the tools they need and can
Yeah.
articulate on this, but then the schools to kind of offer that backup support. But
Yeah.
I think it's really, that's I hear that talked about, but I rarely hear it being implemented. I think that's like the desire of where there's that hope that will go. Did you
Yeah.
ever find your parents talking about fertility awareness with you or sharing about that? Or did you find it was really like it wasn't happening at school, wasn't happening at home? And so it was
Yeah.
really through friendships and with one particular friend getting married that you were like, wait, what is this?
Yeah, exactly. I would say the latter. We didn't really talk about it at home at all. Um, I think it was definitely more the, like, we abstained from sex until marriage, and like that's just kind of what it is. But I think that's to no, like you're saying, like to no fault to our parents, because I just don't know that mine necessarily felt equipped to talk about it. Yeah, I think that's a good area, or a good, I don't know, a good
It's like a
indication
good
of what
focus. I know
parents
exactly
were
what you're
feeling.
saying. It's like, okay, how do you do that? Because it's just like
Yeah,
so much. It's like, okay, is it a program that they go through? Is it something that the parish
right.
needs to do in addition to everything else they're trying to implement or work on? And I think, I
Yeah.
mean, that's a whole space that I'm sure you've seen too on just, I mean, I know you're not within like marriage and family life office, but just that with your own personal passion in this area that you articulated so beautifully, but then also in that work of the archdiocese seeing like, okay, they're really trying to get this programming in, but then there can be that lack of implementation on parish side depending on
Yeah,
who the
for sure.
parish has available
Mhm.
and what's already going on within their parish life altogether really, and what
Mm.
they value or think they see a need for, that I think just gets challenging. And then the conversations around parents, it's like, oh well, we can't even get this available for couples very
Right,
well, so how are
right.
we going to even focus on parents? It's almost like that focus gets so much so of the engaged couples, which makes sense, but then that long term, I think that long-term planning and thinking of, but wait, if we started younger, we wouldn't be scrambling necessarily with some
Oh,
of
yeah,
the engaged couples.
100%. And yeah, I
A
mean,
lot.
like,
It's a lot.
yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot, especially, if your first introduction to NFP is when you're starting your wedding planning process and trying to navigate the stress of that, and your cycles get all wonky because you're stressed, and um, yeah, I mean, my first real exposure to NFP was through my friends, and my sister-in-law and her husband had gotten married, I think 5 years before us. So they touched on it before too, and I knew that my sister-in-law, was also passionate about NFP, and um, she introduced me to which methods to use, and or to check out, and yeah,
That's
I don't
great
know,
to have
yeah.
that support like that. Did you
Hmm.
find that 'cause you just mentioned, I think something else that so often happens is like you're learning NFP as you're planning a wedding and you're stressed out and you're probably trying to find an apartment or a home. They're just
Yeah,
all
for
these
sure.
factors. Did you start really learning NFP during that process of planning your wedding, or were you able to start a little bit ahead of time? And even just starting to chart, so you're like, okay, I have an idea of what I'm doing, so I'm not like totally blown out of the water here.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. We had about a year-long engagement, and I think we wanted to get started on it right away because we had heard from our friends, like, you're going to get really stressed out closer to your wedding, and it's going to be more difficult to chart and figure out like what your body does in a non-stress state. So I think we wanted to start as early as we could. But we went through it together, and I remember we went through the couple to couple league, and we did an online course. And as a side note, it's kind of funny because we thought we were signing up for like a 6 o'clock, online course. It was like 3 hours for each session, but it turns out it was like 6 o'clock Mountain Time, and so it ended up being like 9 p.m. to midnight for us or
Oh
something
my
like that. It
God.
just was super late, but it was fun, like just hanging out and going through it together. And we had our little bowl of snacks in between us, asking each other questions if we didn't understand what was going on. But um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, what was the question? I got derailed.
No, it's all good. I
That's
think
all I
that
remember. That's one of the most more like
I
pungent
think that's
memories that I
great
have.
though, it's like, okay, that memory of like, okay, we're we're taking an online class, we got the time
Yeah.
wrong. It's 3 hours a session, which I mean, I think that is sometimes that's a little bit daunting with NFP because I remember ours being in person, but it was a little bit like, okay, we're done with work. We're in, we were doing work, grad school and undergrad between us. And it was
Wow.
crazy because it was just like, all right, we got to like make sure our brains are on for this because this is
Yeah,
like, our having kids, I mean, it was just like
for
this idea that we
sure.
didn't even fully understand, like, we're going to be able to create life with God.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's wild. And then you're like,
Right.
okay, these classes are they're inundating. I mean, even as someone who charted for a couple of years and I had awareness of my body and what was going on. I mean, I had not had any formal training in a
Mm,
particular method. I had been using Kindara in
yeah.
college, and so it was helpful, but it was like, wow, I've never actually sat down and really looked at this or ever really charted thinking about family planning and thinking about
Mhm.
openness to life and stuff like that because
Totally.
it's a totally different in a playing field in that sense because you're like, wow, this is an added layer of vulnerability and just an openness and a receptivity. I think as a woman, you're like, wow,
Mhm.
this is going to change my body and just a trajectory of my life in a very it's a beautiful thing, but it's
Right.
okay to be intimidated by it. And so then to sit down and you have these really intense classes, you're like, well, and not to say I'm sure this is
Mhm.
scaring people like, oh my gosh, 3-hour classes. It sounds like
Yeah, no,
crazy.
it's
It's
yeah.
dependent on the method and how you want to sign up. I mean, you can chunk things together and do like a
Mhm.
lot in a short amount of time. You can have it broken down to do like an hour a week. I mean, there's the flexibility that way, but
Mhm.
I remember we did something similar because we were like, well, we have pretty finite amounts of time. So
Yeah,
how are we going to do
definitely.
this?
I can't even imagine trying to balance all of that at one time.
Were you guys, when you were engaged, were you in undergrad at the time or were you at this point graduated and then planning your wedding?
Yeah, actually, we were in undergrad. We were both in our senior year at the U of M.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Very similar to us
yeah,
then.
yeah, definitely not the same course load as a grad student, but
You feel it.
still lots of fun things to juggle. So
Yeah, that's awesome though. So, from your perspective, just like the professional aspect and the personal, what are areas that you find fertility awareness needs more support or just more of a light shown on? I mean, we've talked a little bit
mhm,
about just education for parents and really focusing a little bit more intentionally on that and thinking that long-term approach of, okay, if we're educating parents and kids at younger ages, they're more aware. It's not as daunting when you're taking your classes because regardless, I think even if you really
oh yeah,
know fertility awareness or not, or you've been tracking, there's a level that it does feel daunting and a little bit like, "Whoa, okay, we're doing this." Like when you start with a practitioner during engagement, because there's a lot of still unknowns, especially if, you're not having sex and you've never done that. And you're wondering like, okay, what is this? How does this even work? And now we're talking about the like specifics of charting and cervical mucus and
mhm,
babies and ovulation. you know?
right.
So I'm making this question really long, but I'll get back
No,
to
you're
the
good.
main point of it. Just areas, yeah, areas of support, areas where you're like, man, this would be so great, or I wish there was more of X happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I guess kind of as I mentioned earlier, definitely um, working it more maybe into Catholic school education rubrics, maybe like having some mention of it in high school, like why the teachings of NFP are so beautiful and empowering. Because I think at that age, 17, 18, young women are being bombarded by, the whole, I don't know if this is the right term or even a term, but the whole birth control culture where it's like a quick fix and it's the first thing that your provider says like when you walk in for your physical is just, like are your periods painful? Do you find yourself struggling with acne? Like, okay, we'll put you on birth control. And from there it's kind of like you don't really know anything different. Um,
Hmm.
so being I guess educated or introduced to NFP can seem very, like granola crunchy, like does this really work, like is this just some like hippie thing or whatever, but there's so much science to back it up, which I think is beautiful, and it really goes a long way, I think, for women at that age who are looking for truth and who are looking for true empowerment. And I think a big component of that comes from knowing your body and understanding it from a young age, not just when you're engaged and ready to get married. Um, when it comes to the parish level, I would say um, potentially just increasing like awareness and resources that are readily available in each parish, like a standardized I don't even know. I don't have the perfect solution, but just more awareness, I guess, around NFP and how it's not just for couples, it's for all women who want to understand their bodies better. Because I think that also would increase or decrease the stigma behind, sex and what the church teaches. And again, going back to one of the classes, it was like three-hour classes that were like once a month for 3 months. Yeah. And just in one of them, I just remember them saying, we're going to get this out of the way right away. The church loves sex. And I was like, whoa, like you,
That's a powerful thing to say.
yeah, that is a powerful thing to say. And when it's used in the right context and, um, when it's used in marriage as a renewal of your wedding vows, it's a very beautiful thing. And it's not something that we need to be ashamed of or scared to talk about, which I think you do a great job covering over at Managing Your Fertility. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, I've realized in the process of just opening up that conversation more, just through posts, right? I mean, it's just like, okay, one Instagram live and a couple posts, and those are the Instagram's telling me like, wow, these are performing better than all those other posts you seem to be
Yeah,
putting up. And I'm thinking, oh wow, okay, there's
totally.
something here. And I love that you said that and just sharing even from your class that they're saying,
Hmm.
the church doesn't hate sex. The church loves sex. The church thinks it's
Right.
a beautiful thing. And it's, I think we hear that and we automatically are drawn then to the eroticism of sex, and just we have, purity culture on one end and extreme
Hmm.
eroticism pornography on the other. And it's like, no, the church isn't saying either of those. And to be in the middle does not mean relativism. It
Yeah.
really means like these extremes are not where we're called to live. And this
Mm.
isn't truth. It's like, where is the beauty in this? And the fact that God made sex, it's like, well, he made that and created that for spouses to share in. So there has to be something beautiful in that. He doesn't make
Right.
bad or ugly things.
Totally.
And I think we just forget that when we are so quick to jump into like, okay, NFP and family planning, and this sounds so good. And it's like, yeah, it is
Hmm.
good, but we have to, I think, work on that mindset aspect before we even jump into the practicals or the conversations around babies and family planning, because for some people they don't even realize that enjoying sex is a thing you can do. It's
Totally.
it's
Yeah.
the idea that, oh yeah, of course, like I'm open to life, I have babies, but it's like, okay, well, we also need, where are you coming from? We need to have those conversations too that I think
Yeah.
um often I've realized are getting missed.
Mm.
They're not happening in the classes because the classes are very focused on the practical, the scientific data, which is good. We need that. But then where are the conversations around mindset or how you think about sex or how to have conversations honestly with your spouse about sex? Like, where do those happen?
Right.
And I don't know if you've seen that at all, just in your own, just, not to put you on the spot from a professional
No,
standpoint
you're
as like a
good.
representative of the Archdiocese, but really from a personal perspective, like,
Hmm.
did you find that you found that in your classes, or were you really having to look and see, okay, who's on social media talking about this? Or like, how do I find what's the norm aside from
Yeah.
Glamour or Google?
Right, totally. Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't really hear it in my classes because it was more focused on, the technical aspects of everything. But I don't remember how I got plugged into them, but there are groups on Facebook where there's one that's like NFP or Catholic wives like talking about or conversations about sex or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and they actually went into they go into conversations just about like, is this licit in the church? Like, um, you know, like, is it okay to do this and this? And it's just like, wow, that was really eye opening to just, observe these conversations. Um, and even just having discussions with like my sister-in-law and our friends and our immediate circle of friends and um, just understanding the beauty of sex aside from just the I don't know, like you're saying, the technical workings of it, and understanding that it is meant to be enjoyed and it's a good thing. It's not something dirty. And I think, yeah, that definitely comes, that vision of it being dirty or, um, I don't know, erotic, like you were saying, for sure comes from our culture of pornography and just how readily available it is and how women are seen as objects. And it can be a struggle, I think, for both sexes to to see sex as something beautiful in the context of how the church teaches, sex within marriage.
I like too that you're pointing out it can be both man and woman struggling with that, because I think
Mhm.
sometimes we tend to put it on one or the other
Mhm.
depending on what the topic is. But really, I mean, this struggle of how we view sex plays out in both parties when it
Yeah,
comes to marriage. I think
definitely.
um I don't know, there's just so much that can be said around, oh, well, this is only a struggle for men in lust. It's like, no, women struggle with lust. Like,
Mhm.
let's be honest,
Mhm.
and just even like challenges with libido and things like that, where it's like,
Yeah.
it's great that there are groups and there are opportunities to be able to find those honest conversations, especially if you don't have it on a more personal level too,
Yeah,
or you're
definitely.
just starting out and you're like, you're trying to
Mhm.
gauge that comfort level with people where
Yeah.
you're like, okay, is this person going to be okay talking about this or not? And I think, that sense of privacy and respect around sex is not a bad thing. I think sometimes we see that other extreme of almost like we should be talking about it a lot
Yeah.
and so openly that it's like, well, no, there's that sense of reverence and mystery that's okay.
Totally.
But obviously, there is that need to say, okay, what's licit, what's not, what's okay. Are there things that the church says, whoa, no, don't do that,
Right.
and
Right.
frankly, there are very few things that the church is outrightly saying no, because it gives that framework and those guidelines that are really allowing the couple that discernment process, because it's like, well, the church doesn't know what struggles you may have specifically as a couple. They know in
Right.
general the struggles that couples face, especially in this realm of sexual intimacy. But I think we need to start seeing that as beautiful and not something obnoxious or annoying, that it's like, why can't the church give a rubric? It's like, how awful would it be to have a rubric for sex?
Right.
How awful.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly. And that
I
would
think we
turn
forget
people
that.
away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we think it's a turn off that the church gives a framework. It's like, it's so beautiful because it allows for each couple to really discern what makes sense in their marriage. And yeah, of course there are like certain things where it's like, Kate, no, masturbation is not okay.
Right.
You
Right.
do need to finish in the woman, and things like that, where people are like,
Mhm.
whoa, I can't believe you're saying that. It's like, well, it's just true. Like, that's what the church says. And it's good that she
Right.
has some boundaries, because she understands, as flawed human beings, our struggle to quickly turn someone from subject to object. And
Right.
I think that just is something we really need to lean into and see
Mhm.
more of those conversations. And maybe that's something you can speak to as well, like in your own journey and in your own
Mhm.
increased love of sharing NFP. Do you find that conversations happen more? This is very subjective question this way, but do you find that more
Yeah.
conversations are happening on social media, online, in those chats, in those conversations, those Facebook groups, or are you starting to see that even in your own parish life, where there's maybe a turn starting?
Hmm. Well, just to go back for 1 second I'm really glad that you touched on this, just about like talking about sex in general. And I've kind of learned that there's a difference between talking about sex and sexual acts and sexual intimacy out of reverence and out of genuine, wanting to gain insights from other women versus like gossiping about it, like um like, or bragging essentially. I don't know if bragging is the right word, but just like, oh, do you want to know what we did last night, like
Mhm.
that, versus like, hey, we're wondering about this, act or whatever. Is this like something that you guys have experienced before too, or like know like where the church stands on this, like is this cool? um because it's like, I feel like when you understand the beauty of sex and marriage, as the church teaches, it is a reverent and joyful and celebratory thing. And I think going at it from like the more gossipy angle is kind of framing it as, like you said, like an erotic, like, I don't know,
It's like all the
mystical.
bro movies. I always think of like the bro movies
Yeah,
where they're
exactly.
bumping
Totally.
fists and they're joking, and you're kind of like,
Yeah.
this is weird because I kind of know what you're talking about, but I also have no idea. And that's
Right.
just let's go on this a little bit, because I think this is the weird part of our culture that I've realized, is that we're not actually having honest conversations around sexual acts. We are always alluding to them or trying to be
Yeah.
overtly um coy and seeming like, oh, that there's this thing that we, just very
Hmm.
promiscuous, but not in a way that it's very overt. And I mean, I understand there are realms in which it is very overt,
Hmm.
porn or porn like.
Yep.
But I think for a lot of times when you're looking at billboards, movies, advertising, it's like, as much as we say we're such a sexualized culture, it's like, well, yes and no. And I only mean that because we're not actually being honest about what we're
Mhm.
talking about. We're just like alluding to it in these really overt manners or in
That's
risque
such a good
clothing,
point.
but
Yeah.
we're not actually talking about it because I think if we were, I think everybody would understand like a sexual act comes up and you go, oh, I know exactly what that is.
Hmm.
And for the
Yeah.
amount I think of where we go, wait, what is that? Wait, what? And it kind of becomes that
Right.
low whisper, like, wait, what are they talking about? It's like we actually have no real education around an understanding of like, what is this? And I think to your point too, with reverence, I think we think of reverence as just like this boring ho hum
Mm.
horrible thing when it's like, no, it's being in awe of. It's like being in awe of something and really wanting to respect it and
Yes.
love it well or love that person well and reverencing them. And I think we forget that like that is so much more beautiful than this idea of like, coy, teasing,
Yeah.
overt sexual. I don't even know what you'd want to call it,
Yeah, exactly. That's
like
what I was fumbling too, because I'm like, what do you want to call it? But I think we can all resonate, hopefully, with that feeling, I guess, of yeah. Again, gossiping is not the right word, but just more of the coy, promiscuous. I don't know.
it's like
Like
a
it's so
it's a
hush hush.
yeah, it's elusive and wanting to draw someone in, but you're not really quite sure what you're being drawn into. You're like,
Right.
I have an idea, but I actually have no idea. It's the
Right.
weirdest, it's the weirdest framework that I think we've created culturally or allowed to be created, because I sometimes I hate saying like, oh, culturally, what's happening culture? It's like, well, we are a
We
part of
are the culture.
culture. We are the culture. So
We
what are
create
we
culture.
allowing,
We create the culture. Yes, totally.
Right. And so I think that idea of like it just happens to me, it's like, no, it's something we create,
Yep.
it's life happens for you. So what the heck is going on that we're allowing for this? And how
Mhm.
can we that dialogue? And so in that sense, like how do you think women, I think especially, but couples too, but let's focus on women right now,
Okay.
to
Yeah.
use their voices in the space of fertility awareness? Because I think
Yeah.
as we're saying, we are the culture. So
Hmm.
if we are tired of seeing conversations but not actually conversations around sex or alluding to sex but actually have no idea what the heck sex really is and what we're talking about, um what are different ways that you think we can use our voices?
Yeah. I think it would first start with just not being afraid to have conversations, even if you're not like a quote unquote professional in the NFP world. Like, look at us today, like
Yeah.
I do not consider myself a professional in any means about like NFP or fertility awareness, but just putting yourself out there. Um, any just like putting yourself out there, discussing our NFP journey and why we do it, how it's affecting our lives for the better. I think even if you don't want to immediately jump onto social media and start professing your love for NFP, you can just start with your friends, your married and unmarried friends. Um, Ask them where they're at with their fertility journey or if they've even heard of NFP. And I feel like I'm pretty lucky to have a great group of friends who are familiar with NFP. And it's led to, just so many insightful and knowledgeable discussions about the science behind it and the beauty behind it. And also, I think just also remembering to set realistic expectations for for learning NFP, and that it can be difficult to manage your time, like we kind of touched on. But and I know each method kind of has different what's the word, criteria
Hmm.
or timelines for that. Um, but just realizing kind of or recognizing the beauty of it despite any difficulties. And then I would just say also don't expect people to immediately understand or want to engage in conversations. So respecting where people are, in their fertility awareness journeys, and underscore this, approaching people with compassion. So that goes a long way, whether that be women who are on birth control and who don't know how to get off. You need to, I'm not saying you, but like we as women, should be cultivating a space where other women are comfortable to share with us, free from judgment. And from there, you don't go into it with the expectation of, oh, I'm gonna help this person, and she's just like all of a sudden just miraculously gonna want to learn about NFP. It's like approaching out of genuine love for your neighbor and love for other women, and wanting them to feel empowered and be empowered. I think that's how I've been approaching it, and that's how I hope it comes off to people, because the last thing I want is for people to feel judged for um, their sexual history.
I really like that. I really like what you're saying there, especially I'm just like clinging onto that aspect of compassion, because I
Mm,
think that is something, especially if you're passionate about NFP, or you've seen the goodness, even amidst the hardship, you see the goodness of practicing fertility awareness in your life. You can sometimes take on that savior mentality. Like, I'm going to
yeah,
help you.
for
I'm going to save
sure.
you. I'm going to get you off of birth control. It's so bad for you. And it's like, okay, you're in a space where you have total awareness of what's going on, and you've
Mm,
increased that awareness of your own body and just the benefit of understanding how it works. But someone may be coming from a space where they have never done that before in their life. They may know how to respond to cues of hunger or when they have a migraine, or they may not, because a lot of times we're not even taught how to just be in tune with our body in a very natural sense, to be
mm,
present. And in that present moment of saying, how am I feeling? And actually responding to our body out of love, out of self-care. And so I
yeah,
think that aspect of really saying, okay, no, it comes from a space of compassion, of genuinely wanting this person to have this information,
right.
and not from the sense of our own self saying, I'm going to save you. I'm going to help you. I have the truth. It's like, you might have the truth, but it's not up to us, I think, to, change hearts. That's God's job. And
Totally.
it's
Yep.
our space to say, okay, I'm going to bring this and I'm going to share it. And this person, I'm going to leave the door open. So if they have more questions, they can come back.
Yeah.
And just what you said too about, creating spaces for women that they find that they feel comfortable sharing, that it's not a place of judgment, that
Right.
they can say, oh yeah, I actually have been on hormonal birth control, or I have been struggling with painful periods or painful sex or whatever it might be, to be able to feel like they could say that without it being like, "What? Oh my gosh, how
Mm-hmm.
dare you?" Because I think there is that sense in the Catholic Church, um, or I should say not within well, maybe within the Catholic Church. That's possible too. I think from an outsider's perspective, as individuals who are not in the space of practicing NFP, think like, "Oh, I'm going to be judged so hard for choosing
Mm,
normal contraception, or for speaking up about, you know, XYZ, or talking about sex." And, I think that stigma is somewhat still there, somewhat not. It just totally depends on
mm-hmm.
on individuals' experiences. And so I think just to break through that and realize, that's not something we're trying to perpetuate whatsoever. And in some ways we're
Right.
trying to dismantle that altogether.
Yeah.
Because I think that has existed in many different ways. I mean, I think it exists in other religions too. It's not just in the Catholic Church, but I think the Catholic Church gets it hardest when it holds
Mm,
the truth of human sexuality, and it does. And I think that's a whole space that we have to remember, like you said, the compassion, because otherwise, um, I think that unfortunate holier than thou mindset can come
mm-hmm.
through, or someone sees that and that stereotype and thinking, oh yeah, the Catholic who knows so much. And
Right.
it's just like, okay.
Totally.
I know I'm
Yeah.
I'm overgeneralizing in some ways, because I'm sure some people
No,
hear this and think like, "Oh, come on, that's like everywhere." But it's like, well,
no, I completely
it
understand what
happens.
you're saying. And I feel like it's funny that we kind of touched on this, because I would consider myself like a revert to the Catholic faith. Like I grew up in Catholic schooling and everything, but it wasn't really until college that I clung to the Catholic faith and was really interested in the teachings and understood them. But my husband was really the first example, my then boyfriend, of just walking with somebody on their journey wherever they're at. He never made it me feel like I was a project, or like I needed to be brought back to the faith, or like have the truth revealed to me. It was more just like a quiet presence there. Like I knew I could lean
Mm.
on him for support. And I mean, that's what I want to be. And I'm sure that's what you want to be for women in the fertility world. One solid good encounter with just one person can lead to lots of good. And I've kind of recognized that from my time in the Office of Evangelization and with the Archdiocese, and learning how um, to meet people where they're at, and just explaining your why. That's really all that you can do, is explain your experience. And hopefully it resonates with somebody.
I love that so much. I just love what you're doing in just the space of the Archdiocese and in your role in
Thanks.
communications and really helping to bridge those connections, especially in that space of NFP. I know you're not within that marriage and family life, but you're so much about being a connector and saying, okay,
Mm.
there are different ways that we can bring this in. And so that personal passion is just, I love how it's coming through in your work and in your personal life. It's so good.
Me too. And that's the Holy Spirit. I will tell you that, honestly. I just
That's so
feel
good.
so blessed to be where I am today.
That is so good. I think this is a good spot for us to wrap up because I think we could keep going, but
Yeah,
we can
totally.
always do we can always do another episode. But to give, I
Sounds
think,
great.
just these nuggets of wisdom and just these aspects to really have individuals think about, like where am I needing to grow in this space? What am I struggling with? Where am I holding back? Where do I hold back in the teachings of the
Mm.
church? Where am I needing to bring more compassion when I talk about this? I mean, there's just so much that you shared with us today that I'm really, really grateful for. So thank you so much for being on the show, for sharing your heart and your work and all that you're doing. I'm
Well,
also going to
thank
be
you.
sure in the show notes to add your cookies account too, in addition to your personal, because it's beautiful. So
Thanks. Yeah, no,
it's really fun.
thank you for having me. And I'm very humbled to be involved with your mission and the work of managing your fertility. And I just know you're going to continue doing great things. So thank you for your ministry.
Thank you so much, Cami.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and help expand the conversation around women's health. If you'd like to learn more about fertility awareness, visit www.managingyourfertility.com for more information, resources, guides, and so much more.